I will explain for Nick's sake in a minute. Declaration of Independence. On the one hand, I don't know if you read your textbook, but it discussed how imperative it is for you. Absolutely, I don't care what the law says to do it. It said that in the very first half of it, pretty much. And they mentioned something about, some quote about, okay, if you don't like the way the law is, elect somebody new and get them to change it. Other than that, you just do it. Was that in your textbook, or was that some of my other references? Okay, that's a thought. But the first part of this, and the reason there's some tension here, is because there's some tension here. They rebelled against the King of England. He's the head of the church. Well, some Scottish people said Jesus was the head of the church, and they lost their head. But so everybody had a different opinion. What happened was, how do you reconcile the first half of this assignment with the second half of the assignment of that chapter, who is just going, they were such great people because they rebelled against the king. The first half, I don't care what it says, elect somebody new. Yes?
Because the king was not, what they were doing was against their laws that they'd set up, right?
The king was being tyrannical, he was overstepping his power. Right?
Yeah. He had the power to do it, but not the authority.
That's beautiful. So we're going to be talking about how do you reconcile that. I mean, this is the thing. Ought you to rebel like the founders? I'll give you an example. Rosa Parks. Anybody know who Rosa Parks is?
She gets to sit where she wants to.
Who?
She sat down for what she believed in.
She parked herself where she wanted to park. What, there was actually an ordinance of men, a municipal law, that said those people of color, in so many words, must sit in the back of the bus. Municipal law. So was Rosa Parks right or wrong to sit in the front of the bus? And do you have a question or comment or answer?
I thought she was in the back of the bus anyway, and someone came and took her seat anyway, or tried to. I'm not sure about that.
Oh, really? So it was one of these things she was just tired and it wasn't worth fighting for?
That's what I thought.
Okay. Jackie Robinson got a bad conduct discharge from the Army. Other than that, he was a hero in the Army. He was a great American fighting man. And he was bad conduct discharged because he refused to sit in the back of the Army bus with his people of color when he was ordered to do so. That's interesting. What did you say?
I thought that the story of Rosa Parks was the colored people were allowed to sit in the front of the bus as long as a white person didn't come
Okay.
and sit there instead, and then they
Right.
would have to move back.
In so many
And
words.
she refused.
Right, in so many words, too bad, so sad, I'm staying seated, okay? Now what ended up happening, because of her rebellion to the municipal law, but again, it's in question,
She was
is
arrested, wasn't she?
ultimately is a municipal law based on what we've read so far. If it's done outside the authority of that revealed law, natural law, which is God's will, and the fundamental constitutional law, in that order, is it a law? That's what we're going to talk about here. So that's what happens is, how do you celebrate on one hand, absolutely, I don't care what the law says, do it. And then on the other hand, you say, rebel against the very king, the very foundation of government, overthrow the whole dumb thing. That's a little bit, schizophrenic there. So what's going to happen is we're going to have to, this is American government. Whether you like it or not, there's philosophy of government in America, innately with America, that has these structures of authority where, in America, who's really the king? Who's we?
People.
Yeah. Collectively, you have created the state. And you've limited the state, even as Blackstone said, within there's certain limitations of authority. It cannot violate revealed law, that of the scripture, cannot violate, that is in natural. We're going to hear the term, and when you get to Constitution, Article 3, it's going to talk about law, equity, and then the laws of the United States in that order, in that authority structure. Okay? So those are the kind of things, as principles of the philosophy of American law that we're going to see here in the Declaration of Independence. Okay. Before we do that, get out, and what we're gonna do, I'm gonna talk about these things here that you're gonna keep in your notebook, because we're gonna come back to them as we go through the Constitution and various things. We're gonna come back to the things I gave you. But before we do, I want you guys to open your notes. And I'm gonna hit a couple of things on, remember last week we talked about number 15. 15, that whole question of 15 led up to this Declaration of Independence study. You don't have it with you? So keep this stuff, everything I give you, keep it in your notebook. Okay, so that the homework where it was, I had those questions out of Blackstone to answer. We're just gonna cover a couple of them that are relevant to what we're gonna talk about today. So there's things actually happening in the Congress, you see in the news, that violate the Constitution, that they're doing. Everybody says, oh, it's a great way to get through the budget process. It actually violates the Constitution. It's tyrannical, it's undermining the authority. It just totally, completely undermines exactly what the framers set up as a boundary, a check and balance, competing ambitions. You know, but most people, because they haven't really studied this stuff, don't realize how dangerous it is. So we're gonna look at number one. I said the law is the, does anybody know what the answers were? What's that first statement?
Rule of action.
Law is a rule of action, which is
Prescribed.
by some superior, which the inferior is bound to obey. Okay, that's one we went through together now that I remember it. Now, let's look at number two. This is a maxim in American law and government. A state of what will inevitably oblige the inferior to take on the will of him. What's it say?
On whom he depends.
Okay, what is it, Hunter?
It's a state of dependence will inevitably oblige the inferior to take the will of him on whom he depends as the rule of his conduct in all those points where his dependence consists.
What does that mean? And how come you girls are, I'll ask later why the girls aren't answering.
Politics sucks.
What does that mean? Common language. Nobody knows? I'll give you an example. If you, you haven't experienced it yet, but the more independence you have because of money in your pocket, the less dependence you have, and the greater tendency you will experience to say, I don't really care what my parents want right now because my need factor is decreased. Okay? And there's certain things, in fact, it came up in the healthcare Supreme Court thing, is they were whining, hey, we're going to have to come up with all this money to comply with this thing. And a judge down in Florida said, no, you don't. You don't have to obey the healthcare law of Florida. You don't have to do it. It's completely optional. But because you opted into the dependency program that the federal government offered you, Florida, you have to obey the rule. If you don't want to do it, you don't have to participate. Because your dependency, you've opted into a dependency program, that state did, they are now bound by those rules because of that dependence. It's a maxim in law that is still there, and that's something that I figure it was good for a teenager to hear because you're experiencing it even in your own life as it changes. Now, what about number 5?
All on two foundations depend on human laws.
Yeah. What's the two foundation depend on human laws?
Was it law of nature
Jason?
and law
Jason?
nature and revelation?
Ah, the law of nature, the law of God, or the law of revelation. Okay? So all laws depend on they said the law of nature and law of God. George Mason actually said that the law of nature is the law of God in a Virginia case. And we're going to see some documents that George Mason drafted here today. So, number 6. What are the natural foundations of society? Hunter.
The wants and fears of individuals.
The wants and fears in individuals. What this goes back to is, we're going to be seeing this in the Declaration of Independence. They talked about the justification of forming a government. And it goes back to these things that Blackstone said, because men, and he even referenced John Locke from 90 years earlier, because mankind, fear being able to protect their property by themselves, they've joined together in society. And when they joined together in society, they gave up certain rights, certain individual rights, so that now because they have made themselves dependent on the state that they've created, they have bound themselves to obey the rules that they come up with collectively. So it's because of their wants and fears. I want something, I fear something, so that this is the theory of government that the founders understood, that they had framed government because of these wants and fears, these desires for protection, okay? To collective thing, you know, put their, basically cast in everything in one lot and agree to a principle, even as this thing mentioned, the Mayflower Compact. They put everything together, submitted to one another, called it a civil body politic, and now once you form that, then you're bound to that. And you're gonna see this Declaration of Independence, what they did is they cut off their dependence on the King of England. They declared, we are no longer dependent on you, we are now collectively forming a state. So we're gonna see that. They may have a question so far. All right, let's go. Now let's go to these things that I've handed to you. One of them is the Virginia Constitution of 1776. Somebody look and explain to me what is that, those numbers, what is that number there? June what?
29.
What year?
1776.
1976? No,
That's what I said.
1776. June what?
29.
When was the U.S. Declaration of Independence? July 4th? So, wow, 6 days later, 5 days later, this Virginia Constitution was in effect prior to the Declaration of Independence. But we're going to see something here. Open up in your books to, you've actually got a Declaration of Independence, right? Back in page 200 and something or other.
Yes.
We're going to open to that. Yes, page 257. Everybody open to page 257 in your book. So prior to that is this Virginia Constitution. We're going to see that this Virginia Constitution, everybody's celebrating what the great work that Thomas Jefferson did, as if he just sat in a corner and made this stuff up. You're going to see stuff in here that's in the Declaration of Independence of the United States. But wait, there's more. Let's get this other thing. It says Declaration of Rights. The following is a complete text, Virginia Declaration of Rights. A Declaration of Rights made by the representatives of the good people, etc., etc., etc. And if you flip to the page 2 of that, you see the bottom line there. Adopted unanimously June 12th, a couple of weeks earlier, in the Virginia Convention of Delegates, drafted by Mr. George Mason. All right? So these kind of things. So what we're going to see here is in this first part of this Declaration of Rights that came out in the first part of June, a month before the Declaration of Independence, we're going to see some words in here that showed up pretty closely in the Declaration of Independence. In this Virginia Constitution, when they're justifying forming a new government, casting off the old and forming a new one, there's some things that are in here that showed up in the Declaration of Independence. Okay? A lot of people don't know it. It came, the vast majority of it came right out of Virginia. So we're getting a little U.S. government, Virginia government morphed together there. So here we go. Let's go to page 257. Well, the first thing I want to do before we go to page 257, I'm going to read, and you can follow along with me, in the Virginia Constitution of 1776. The form of government agreed to and resolved upon the delegates and representatives of the several counties and corporations of Virginia. Whereas King George, and I'm going to skip his title, hath endeavored to prevent the same, his kingly office into a detestable and insupportable tyranny, that's exercising power without authority, by putting his negative on laws the most wholesome and necessary for the public good. And then it lists a whole slew of things that he did wrong, and then turn to the next page, and you see some letters in bold. I did not add that emphasis. That was done by the framers of this document, by which several acts of misrule the government of this country is formally exercised under the Crown of Great Britain is totally dissolved. They turned off their dependency. They had read Blackstone. They had read all these philosophers of law. In fact, Blackstone was the officially approved government concept of law. So they were taking what he said, that everybody understood to be true, and they exercised it. They said, for the following reasons, we dissolve the government. Now, let's go to page 257. I need a reader from page 257. Hunter. Just keep going until I tell you to stop.
The Declaration of Independence in Congress, July 4th, 1776. When in the course of human events it becomes necessary for one people to dissolve the political bonds which have connected them with another, and to assume, among the powers of the earth, the separate and equal station to which the laws of nature and of nature's God entitle them, a decent respect to the opinions of mankind requires that they should declare the causes which impel them to the separation. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed, that whenever any form of government becomes destructive to these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or abolish it, and to institute a new government, laying its foundation on such principles and organizing its powers in such form as to them shall seem most likely to affect their safety and happiness.
Stop. We've heard that. I want you to now go to the Declaration of Rights. This was approved in Virginia, June 12th, 1776, just a few weeks prior to this Congress, Second Continental Congress, First Continental Congress, whatever they are. You know, I got all the little, I've strained all the gnats and, okay, here we go. I haven't got my camels in order. Here we go. Let's look at this. Read with me. A Declaration of Rights made by the representatives of the good people of Virginia in free convention, which rights do pertain to them. Now look what these rights are, the first three paragraphs. All men are by nature equally free and independent, have certain inherent rights, of which when they enter into a state of society, we know from Blackstone, that's all of us getting together and forming an agreement to come in and form a government. They cannot by any compact deprive or divest their posterity, namely the enjoyment of life, liberty, and with the means of acquiring and possessing property and pursuing and obtaining happiness and safety. Now, the property, the happiness and safety went back to some of the things that John Locke had written 100 years earlier that talked about these property rights, these very natural rights that man, even in a state of society, has no authority to interfere with. Okay? That all power is vested in, consequently derived from the people, that magistrates are their trustees and servants, and at all times amenable to them. It's still in the Virginia Constitution this way. But again, it talks about the prerogative of the people to alter the government. Let's look at this third verse, this third section. The government ought to be instituted for the common benefit, protection, security of the people, nation, or community, of all the various modes and forms of government that is best, which is capable of producing the greatest degree of happiness and safety, and is most effectually secured against the danger of maladministration. Whenever any government shall be found inadequate or contrary to these purposes, a majority of the community hath an dutiable, unalienable, and indefeasible right to reform, alter, or abolish it in such manner as shall be judged most conducive to the public will. So you see these things that the Declaration of Independence took some of these things that we've seen there and put it in that kind of preamble section of the warm-up. This is why we're doing it. This is kind of the whereas part of the Declaration of Independence, kind of setting them up. And it was based on some of these principles that Virginia had already declared in the previous month. Let's go back. It was done at the House of Burgesses. Now, where is that? It's down the street from William and Mary. If you go back 90 years earlier, 80 years earlier, yeah, close to it, 85, 86, whatever, 87 years earlier, William and Mary had taken the throne in England and deposed James II, and there was a lot of tyranny that stopped. In fact, what they did is they allowed and encouraged and facilitated what was known as the English Bill of Rights. It was Declaration of Rights right along with what they're doing here. So right down the street from William and Mary, the college, remembering what happened 87 years earlier with William and Mary, contemporaries of John Locke, that they did the same thing. They said, it's time to fix this issue. This has been done before. In England, we've seen the example, but back then they, deposed a king and put a new king in and maintained the same form of government. So you see that in the Declaration of Independence. But now, let's go on now from the Declaration of Independence on page 257. There's a section there where they begin to tell you the horrible things that the king has done. So find that, Hunter, and read from there. What are all the horrible things the king has done?
This is after, to prove this, let facts be submitted to a kindred
Yeah.
world.
Tell us the facts.
He has refused his assent to the laws the most wholesome and necessary for the public good.
Stop. Go back to this Virginia Constitution. Whereas King George, blah, 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 by putting his negative on laws the most wholesome necessary for the public good. It's nearly exact quote. Go ahead, Hunter.
He has forbidden his governors to pass laws of immediate and pressing importance unless suspended in their operation till his assent should be obtained. And
Okay, stop. You're reading out the Declaration of Independence, right? So far, you were word for word with the next paragraph, except attend to them for many years is how this sentence ended. Go with the next one.
He has refused to pass other laws for the accommodation of large districts of people unless those people would relinquish the right of representation in the legislature.
Line by line, same, slight different wording, same thing. Go ahead.
The next one.
Yep.
He has dissolved representative houses repeatedly for opposing with manly firmness his invasions on the rights of the people.
Okay, let's read. This is going to be like reading King James and New King James. I want you to start reading yours, and I'm going to read the same one. The same one you just read. Read it.
The same one?
Yeah.
He has
By dissolving legislative assemblies
houses
repeatedly and continually
for
opposing with manly firmness
his
invasions of the rights of the people. Okay, I'm not going to go any further. It's here for your
That would
reading.
be confusing.
I know it was, but can I tell you what? It was almost on parallel. How we'd have to practice that. There'd be a couple of words that would just be different, but the same meaning. So, how many people knew that the Declaration of Independence paralleled the Virginia Declaration of Independence that had been chosen just a few days before?
I did.
You did. Who else? Anybody else? Okay, nobody in the country is being told this stuff, and this is important. Because what we've done is we step back and see who they were reading. Who was influencing the country? In fact, so that's why I encourage you in Virginia to actually know Virginia law, because guess what? It was adopted by those who framed the Constitution. In fact, there's a case, United States versus Reynolds, where somebody was claiming bigamy, that's to have multiple wives or husbands, whatever, spouses, was lawful if your religion, if it was a part of your religion. So they had to go, whoa, wait a minute. And then they had to figure out, well, what's the definition of religion as far as the First Amendment goes? They don't have one. So what's religion? Well, let's go to, I don't have it. I'm sorry, I don't have it here. It's actually the Virginia Constitution.
Wait.
No, I do have it. The Declaration of Rights. Yeah, they want to know the definition of religion. Here we go. Go to this Declaration of Rights thing. Declaration of Rights. And you go down to number 16 on the back side. I'm glad I mentioned this. XVI on page 2. And the United States Supreme Court, to get the definition of religion for the First Amendment of the Constitution of the United States, came out in 1787. They didn't, you know where they went? They went right here. That religion, and then it defines it. Or the duty which we owe our Creator and the manner of discharging it, so that's the belief and act, can be directed by reason and conviction, not by force or violence. Therefore, all men are equally entitled to free exercise of religion according to the dictates of conscience. It's a mutual duty of all. It's a Christian doctrine. It's his righteous, it's his kindness that's going to lead us into repentance on our faith in Jesus. With that in mind, it is a mutual duty of all to practice Christian forbearance, love, and charity toward one another. The word Christian is in the Virginia Constitution. Yes, it is. It's still there. And it is the basis that the Supreme Court actually started making decisions on the First Amendment of protecting people's freedom of religion, of saying, okay, this law really applies to everybody, but you believe Almighty God has prohibited you from doing this, so we don't have the authority to judge you in it. You are actually immune from the municipal law. Not everybody, everybody's still part of this Commonwealth, but we don't have the authority to put you to task. If you're not obeying this municipal law, it's appointed man once to die, then the judgment. You will ultimately be held accountable to the one whom you say you depend upon. So that's a perspective that they had, willing to risk having people have weird religious ideas and not using the power of the sword to impose that belief system. And that's where, for your mutual edification, one of the things that was done besides the Virginia Constitution, based on the Virginia Constitution, there's a law that's still on the books in Virginia, Code of Virginia 57-1, that's where I got it, where it actually goes into explaining in depth of why those in Virginia didn't want the government and the church to have any kind of financial mutual support, because they realized that that kind of thing is the kind of thing that makes for false religion. It's using the power of the sword to bind your conscience, to influence your conscience, to burden your body, to make you suffer on account of your religious beliefs. So that's I just did a big kind of monologue preaching here. But so the Declaration of Independence wasn't just carved up in Philadelphia. In fact, the vast majority of the Declaration of Independence came out of not just Thomas Jefferson, but the influence of James Madison and George Mason and other Virginians in particular, because they had studied law. In particular, I actually was doing a little historic review on James Madison, and they named a certain law school law student at William and Mary, a law professor, and that they were in particular studying the commentaries of Sir William Blackstone. And that's how they got the basis of their theories in law. So did you have a question? Christian, did you have a question or comment?
No.
Okay, I'm going to check the clock. Wow. Okay. So, I think I've pretty much, let me review here, because I have time. Declaration of Independence. Okay, I do want to do a slight review. One of the things about this that I said that, and I captured on a film, is there is a difference as we read the theory of law, the philosophy of law that was handed down to those who framed the government from Blackstone, from a biblical worldview, that where they could, in one case, let me actually go to, since I don't have the Declaration of Independence of your notebook in front of me, I'm going to go, actually I think I will. There's something in the Declaration of Independence where it talks about when things become insufferable. Where's the words in there that talks about when you just hit your limit? Should be right after instituted among men to protect life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Just a couple of lines in there. Christian, go ahead and read that section that talks about leading up to the point of things being intolerable.
Is it the, we hold these truths to be self-evident?
Yeah, just below that.
It's a little bit below that, but
Yeah.
that sets it up.
Yeah.
That among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their powers from the consent of the government, that whenever any form of government becomes destructive to these ends, it is the right of the people to alter and abolish it, to institute a new government, laying its foundations on such principles and organizing its powers in such form as to them shall seem most likely to affect their safety and happiness.
Okay. So when it gets to the point where you just, it's not right, and one of the things is the unalienable right. One of the things that we think about rights these days, oh, I've got the right to do such and such, and we're all protecting our rice bowl. This is my right. I know my rights! You know, some of you have seen the video. It's shameful. But there's this guy Steve, and he knows his right. But, and the thing is, the founders didn't understand that. What they understood, Blackstone said there are rights and there are wrongs. So it means the unalienable right means when it's a right thing, it is then, as far as they're concerned, a duty. Oh, we have the privilege, we have the benefit. Since it's a right of ours, we can change the government anytime we want. No, they really had the perspective of right and wrong, is that at this point, what's the right thing to do, what's the wrong thing to do? The wrong thing to do would be allow it to continue. The right thing to do would be to fix it. Oh my goodness, how do we do it? Okay? So it's not like, oh, we're going to claim our rights. You know, they're far enough away from us and they have a small enough army that we can get away with it. It was more of what is the right thing? What is the wrong thing? And the reference would be the commentaries.
It was also their last option.
What's that?
It was also their last option.
Well, I don't know. That's debatable. But you're right. And what it is the whole list of things that they told the king is, we have tried through lawful due process to citing our own law and show you by what authority. And there were letters of quo warranto where they say, well, by what authority are you doing this? If you can show us the authority that you're doing it, we'll obey. Reminds me of a guy that was in the news 15 years ago. He actually went, the army said, we want you to put on the UN uniform. And he said, by what authority? I will do it, but my problem is I've read the army regulations on uniform and it ain't in there. And then my oath said, according to regulations, against all enemies, foreign and domestic. And because of these other principles and who's going to be in charge of me, who's a foreigner, I can't, because of my oath to the Constitution, obey your order. Unless you can show me by what authority. And they said, it looks good. I mean, they literally would tell the guy. He ended up getting a bad conduct discharge because of his oath. And he was a Christian homeschooler who took this seriously. Now, he's not in the army anymore. But the principle was, I'm willing to do it. The problem is I gave an oath before God to the Constitution and the orders of the President according to regulations and the Uniform Code of Military Justice. Please fix the regulation or it's not, you could shoot me, I just can't do it. I've given an oath. Okay? So they had done these forms of redress where they said, by what authority are you doing this? And they would not get any mail back. Their mail was not returned. They sent important laws. Please do this. We don't have the authority to act on this, King, unless you put your seal on it. But this is the right thing that needs to happen. It's an emergency for our people. You know, there's a ship coming back on Tuesday. Could you please send us this with your authority, granting that which is the right thing to do? Well, they wouldn't respond to their query. So there's a point where you go, well, what's our responsibility to one another before God, notwithstanding the king abdicating his duty? The one thing you're going to see in the Virginia Constitution and the oath for the President of the United States is their oath to faithfully execute the laws. They've even put something in the Constitution that says you can veto this thing, but if you don't, if it comes to your desk and it's not back in 10 days, you missed your chance to weigh in on it. You don't have an oppomat, you don't have a fixed veto by not answering. So there was things that you're going to see and hear that were problems in this Declaration of Independence that were addressed in the U.S. Constitution as we continue. Okay? Okay, somebody can... That's it. That's it. I think I've used up my time, and if you don't have any questions, what we're going to do next week, we're actually going to be getting into the Constitution. Now that we've declared independence, and it's a right thing to do, with all manly firmness. Okay? Yes. All manly firmness.
You did this with manly firmness.
You got your assignment, which would be section 4, whatever, 1 through whatever.
One of them.
Yeah. That's it. Thank you very much.